Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, that transfer portal, growing by the day. I want to look at my favorite five quarterbacks that are currently in the transfer portal. Now, this conversation might need to get updated in 48 hours, but as we sit right here Friday morning, who are the five best quarterbacks that are currently in the transfer portal? Really excited to get into this one. I think where you want to start is there's all sorts of different kind of quarterbacks that you see in the transfer portal. There's some guys that have excelled at the G5 level that are looking to make that jump up to the Power 4 level. And then there's also some guys that, were really sought after out of high school, haven't necessarily putting it together at the collegiate landscape yet, but a change of scenery and you kind of might unlock all of that potential. So I think if you're an individual team that's looking for a quarterback, one, you're talking about skill set. Like, what kind of quarterback fits the system that we want to run? But I think just as importantly, what kind of quarterback are you looking for as well? A guy that has excelled at the G5 level or a guy that was really sought after out of high school, we know has a ton of talent that hasn't necessarily putting it together for whatever reason at the Power 4 level. Fired up to get into it. Now, before we do, and as always, I got a couple of hot takes in terms of how I stack these quarterbacks. So I would love to hear from y'all in the comment section. The amount of support y'all have shown the fellas as we've covered the transfer portal, it's been amazing. It's an exciting time for a lot of college football fans. So I can't thank you guys enough for rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Let it fly in the comment section. I'm going to start with number one, and that's Kaidon Salter. And there's a couple of reasons I'm going with Kaidon Salter as my number one quarterback in the transfer portal. Now, the conversation is, what version of Kaidon Salter do you get? 2023 Kaidon Salter was one of the more dynamic and impressive quarterbacks that we saw in all of the country. And he hit the transfer portal for a brief moment, decided to come back to Liberty. And for whatever reason, I think a large part of it had to do with there were a lot of really good pieces around him that left the program after last year. The production dipped. But you go back to 2023, you're talking about 2,800 passing yards, 32 touchdowns to 6 interceptions, 57 missed tackles forced with over 1,000 yards rushing. The reason I'm putting Kaidon Salter as my number one quarterback is I think this kid is about as dynamic as it gets from the quarterback spot. And we've seen a lot in college football, quarterbacks that can make plays for their offense, that can extend plays, that can get involved as athletes. Those are the quarterbacks that we're seeing have a lot of success at the collegiate level. And we don't need a Lamar Jackson, but you need a quarterback that can get out of trouble and go create. I think Kaidon Salter is that guy. And the question might be, all right, he's jumping up from Conference USA to the SEC or the Big Ten. How's that jump going to go? Kaidon Salter is a really talented dude. There's a reason. I don't think a lot of people know this, but he was a top 50 national recruit coming out of high school. He's a very coveted quarterback coming out of the high school ranks. He ends up at Liberty, has put some really good stuff on the film, checks a lot of boxes, pushes the ball down the field routinely. His average depth to target during that 2023 year was 13.6 yards down the field, one of the highest marks in the country with a 61% completion percentage. Pushing the ball down the field that much with a plus 60% completion percentage, it's what you're looking for. And so I think Kaidon Salter checks a lot of boxes. And just like every quarterback, there's some pros and cons. I think he's got the skill set to be a very, very good quarterback and, really a difference maker quarterback at whatever school he might go to. The question is, can he make that jump and kind of maintain the production and how he looked in Conference USA? That's the big question. Number two, I'm going to go to Jackson Arnold. Don't sell your stock, at least in my opinion, don't sell your stock in this kid. And I think Oklahoma fans would probably agree with this statement. It was about as bad as it could get around Jackson Arnold for Oklahoma in 2024, especially in the SEC. You can't have that. This was one of the worst pass protecting offensive lines that we saw in the country. They could not run the football worth a darn for the first half of the year. And then on top of all that, his four best wide receivers missed pretty much the entire season. And so Jackson Arnold was in the hardest conference to play. I think a lot of people agree with that, with a bad offensive line, no run game, limited pass catchers on the outside. Of course, he didn't look all that good. Now, the question is, you haven't really seen Jackson Arnold really excel at the college football level during his first 2 years. Although you go back to that freshman year, especially in that bowl game against Arizona, I thought there were some really good things from this kid. I think he can be, if you surround him with just serviceable weapons in an offensive line and a run game, there's a reason this kid was a top 10 national recruit coming out of high school in 2023, one of the top quarterbacks in the class. I'm not selling my stock on Jackson Arnold. I get the film from 2024 was not very good for Jackson Arnold, and I'm not putting it all on his surrounding pieces. I think Jackson Arnold would be the first one to tell you he wasn't that great in 2024 either. Surround this kid with some weapons. And I think it's also important to remind ourselves, like, he's only going into year 3. He's still a young cat in terms of quarterback standards. I think there's a lot of good football in front of Jackson Arnold, and he checks all the boxes, right? 6'1", 210 pounds, very good athlete, big time arm, can make all the throws on the football field. He's a box checker. Now you can surround him in an offense that is serviceable. I think could be a really good quarterback. He's coming in at number 2. Number 3 to me, Miller Moss. And Miller Moss to me is probably the highest floor quarterback that you see in the transfer portal. Whatever team lands Miller Moss, I think you're pretty confident saying you're going to get solid quarterback play. Now the knock on Miller Moss is, are you going to get a Cam Ward? Are you going to get a difference maker quarterback? I would probably say not. I don't think he's going to win a Heisman Trophy. I don't think he's going to be emerging as a top 5 draft pick in the NFL draft. But you kind of know you're going to get good football. And you go back to his time at USC. It was just that offensive line in the first half of the season. USC fans would agree with this, was a disaster. And Miller Moss just did not have a lot of time to operate in the pocket. I think that you saw some really good things from Miller Moss. There were some unfortunate late game turnovers. I think if you inject Miller Moss into a team like Michigan or inject it into a team like Auburn, I think Miller Moss is a significant upgrade from a guy like Peyton Thorne. But I don't know if you're going to get a quarterback that is going to be top 5 in Heisman voting or a top 10 NFL draft pick. Kind of my take on Miller Moss. So if he goes to a team that is kind of ready-made around him, and that's kind of what I mean by a team like Auburn. I think Auburn's got some dudes at pass catcher. They got to revamp the offensive line a little bit. They're going to have a good defense next year. You inject Miller Moss into a team like Auburn, I think they can win a lot of football games. Number 4, Connor Weigman. I'm probably lower than most on Connor Weigman. There's some really, really high moments for Connor Weigman over the last couple of years. I mean, you go back to 2024 Missouri, you go back to 2023 Miami. There are some games where Connor Weigman, and I was a Connor Weigman believer 6 months ago heading into 2024. I was banging the table for this kid as one of the more underrated quarterbacks in the SEC. And it just didn't come to fruition. And to me, he's not that young of a quarterback anymore. He's going into year 4. You still saw a lot of ugly football from Connor Weigman in 2024. Just a little bit too inconsistent for me. And again, I think the ceiling's there. This is another former 5-star quarterback coming out of high school. That was a not very good quarterback class in 2022. But I'll say this. If you can get the best out of Connor Weigman, he does give you a high ceiling. And I think he can win a lot of football games. To me, he's one of the more risky quarterbacks to take in the transfer portal. Last one, and a name that I think people should get to know, Devon Dampier from New Mexico. This kid is an absolute electric factor. And I'll be the first one to admit I don't watch a ton of New Mexico football, but I have watched a little bit, and I went back and watched a little bit more of Devon Dampier when he hit the transfer portal. Over 1,000 yards rushing, 51 missed tackles forced, 19 rushing touchdowns. That's probably where you want to start. One of the best pure athletes at the quarterback position, and he's a guy that is really hard to scheme around. You can try to spy him. You can try to be disciplined in your pass rush lanes. It don't really matter. Like, Devon Dampier is just a different caliber athlete when he has the football in his hands. He's extremely creative as an extender of plays and scrambler. The passing game, I think, is underrated. Now, one thing you want to see him clean up, 12 touchdowns to 12 interceptions. That's not the greatest touchdown to turnover ratio. He will fumble a little bit. He's a little bit he's a young quarterback, only going into year 3. He's a little bit of a loose cannon. You got to clean up some of the turnover stuff for Devon Dampier. This kid is dynamite as an athlete. Completed only 57% of his passes, but his average depth of target was up there around 12 yards. So they were pushing the ball down the field. So I'm not too concerned about the completion percentage. Threw for over 2,700 yards, 22 big time throws. Devon Dampier is an electric factor, and whatever program gets him, and I'm hoping he goes up to the Power 4 level, it's going to be must-watch TV. This kid, to me, is one of the most exciting quarterbacks that you see in the country. The question is, can you keep all of that excitement and playmaking and then limit the amount of turnovers he has, which I think that's reasonable to ask for him going into his second year as a starter, third year in college football. If you get that from Devon Dampier, watch out, this kid. And if you can build an offense, I guess this is probably where you want to, where I should have started. If you can build an offense that leans into Devon Dampier, I think he can be really, really good. And so we'll see where he ends up. At the end of the day, I don't know if he's the best quarterback in the portal. He's going to be must-watch television for Power 4 college football fans. Absolute electric factory as a college football player. We'll wrap it up there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. We'll continue to update this conversation. And I think there's a certain element of, depending on what team, they'll value quarterbacks differently. So as we get into those individual teams and what they're looking for, I think the conversation gets a little bit more clear. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.